Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm your host, John M. Hawkins. You're listening to My Strategy, and we're coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. We're very happy to be here with you today. Our episodes are live and on Saturdays at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. Today, we're going to be doing a Memorial Day tribute. We're going to be talking about those soldiers who paid the ultimate price for our freedom. I'm going to talk about some of the challenges that our veterans face who come back after surviving these conflicts. We're going to give you some tips and tricks to help those returning develop a strategy to stay on track. Well, it's Memorial Day weekend here. Very happy to be here. For me, Saturday is the day I choose to reflect, but just keep in mind that any day is good for you to assess your strategy, and that's what this show is all about, personal development and building our own strategies. The show is growing. We're now available on iHeart, iTunes, Player FM, YouTube, SoundCloud, Spreaker, and more. So if you missed an episode, you can go find them there. Additionally, we are on YouTube as well in the video variety, so you can see the show on YouTube. You can find me on most social media platforms. Twitter handle is Hawkins John. That's Hawkins John. Or you can go to my website at johnmhawkins.com. That's johnmhawkins.com. And just like anything in life, we need to have a strategy and a plan to help us reach our goals because the best laid plans don't always work. Well, this week we are talking about the sacrifice that our soldiers have made for this country. So if you have any stories or good examples of how one has had a challenge and come back, or if you have a good story to tell, please send it to talk@johnmhawkins.com. That's talk@johnmhawkins.com. Every week, those submissions are entered into the giveaway, and you'll receive a Visa gift card along with my latest book, Coach to Greatness. So today we're going to be talking about Memorial Day, in fact, the Memorial Weekend. Memorial Day honors men and women who died in service to our U.S. military. We're going to talk about grief and the loss of loved ones. We're going to talk about how you cope with that grief. You know, when you lose someone that you love, the pain of loss can be overwhelming, but grief is a natural process. And I think you're going to find that as we go through the show, really building a strategy is all about coping mechanisms. It's finding ways to move on even though we're faced with some sort of trial or tribulation. I'm going to talk a little bit about the 5 stages of grief. I'm then going to transition a little bit to talk about those soldiers who survived. In fact, 1 in 10 soldiers returning from Afghanistan suffers from PTSD. 1 in 5 from Iraq. And interestingly enough, the isolation and disconnected societies that our soldiers come home to is one of those contributors. We're then going to talk a little bit about how you can create your own strategy to not only help yourself if you're a veteran or if you know somebody who has lost somebody in war or conflict as well. Memorial Day. Memorial Day is an American holiday observed on the last Monday of May. It honors those men and women who died while serving in the U.S. military. Memorial Day 2019 occurs on Monday, May 27th. It was originally known as Decoration Day. It originated in the years following the Civil War and became an official federal holiday in 1971. Many Americans observe Memorial Day by visiting cemeteries or memorials, holding family gatherings, and participating in parades. But unofficially, it marks the beginning of the summer season. Part of the reason why I want to pay tribute to them is it's easy to start thinking about our vacation plans. It's easy for us to go out there and think about the day off and planning to do work or not to do work, but there is a reason why we have this day and why I want to focus on it. Got an article here titled, "The Grief and Loss of a Loved One, the Days Ahead." It says grief is a natural response when a loved one dies. However, you grieve depends on your personality, your life experiences, the nature of your loss, and your coping style. While there is no right or wrong way to grieve, there are healthy ways to cope and survive the pain and find your new normal as you continue in your life's journey. Here are some ideas to help you process the loss of a loved one. Now, this article is designed specifically for those serving in the military. It says connecting with your casualty assistance officer. Your casualty assistance officer, or CAO, serves as the liaison between you and the service branch. Make the most of your relationship with your CAO. He or she understands the military environment and is aware of all the available support and resources. They can help with transportation and burial expenses, mortuary and funeral honor assistance, benefits and entitlements, personal effects, records, reports, and investigations, legal matters, tax issues, relocation assistance, benevolent, philanthropic, and federal agencies, emotional and spiritual care. They can also help with accessing long-term care. And eventually your casualty officer will return to his or her primary job, but not until matters relating to the survivor's case have been answered. Your CAO should connect with your service's long-term care case management, which will have expert case managers and counselors. You may access support groups, grief counseling, benefit assistance, milestones management, financial counseling to assist with budgeting, investing, estate planning, tax issues, and other long-term care. Fact is that when we lose a loved one, there's a lot of things that we have to take care of. And it really comes home when I start going through the list of all the things that are needed to help these families of these servicemen and women who died fighting for our freedom. They also provide in this article some helpful phone numbers to reach out to. There's the Army Survival Outreach Center, the Navy Gold Star Program, Marine Corps Long-Term Assistance, Air Force Families Forever, Coast Guard Gold Star Program. They then go on to talk about becoming an active griever. The Department of Veteran Affairs encourages the bereaved to be active, not passive. Participate in grief and consider these 4 tasks of grief that were all developed by psychologist William Warden and Teresa Rondo. First and foremost, they say it's important to accept the reality of your loss. The task of grief is breaking through the denial to understand that death has occurred and it cannot be reversed. Mourn the death of a loved one. Although distracting yourself from temporary pain might make you feel better, in the long term it doesn't. Adjust to the environment in which your loved one is missing. It can take time to appreciate the new roles, but you will need to do so and learn new skills. Also, forming a new identity. It's important to be patient with yourself as you form new social connections and slowly try to create an identity. They go on to talk about getting support, and I think having support in a support network is important to anyone going through any sort of challenge, any sort of life change. These life changes, whether it's the death of a family member or whether it's a work change, all have a similar strategy that you can put in place. It means understanding what your options are. How do you take care of your family? What do you do in the days ahead? What resources are available to you? They actually also provide lots of veterinary affairs bereavement counseling. You're listening to My Strategy. I'm your host, John M. Hawkins. We're coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. When we come back, we're going to talk about coping with grief. We'll be right back. Hello and welcome back, everyone. I'm John Hawkins. This is My Strategy. We're coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. We're very happy to be here with you today. Today we're doing a Memorial Day tribute. This episode, I want to honor all those soldiers who paid the ultimate price for our freedom. We're talking about the challenges of the veterans who do survive conflicts. We're giving tips and tricks to help those returning develop a strategy to stay on track. Send us your thoughts at talk@johnmhawkins.com. That's talk@johnmhawkins.com. And we'll enter you into our weekly giveaway. Right before the break, we were talking about the reason for Memorial Day, and that it is to really honor the great men and women who died in service in the U.S. military. Now I want to talk a little bit about coping with grief. Loss of someone you love is one of the biggest challenges. The pain can be overwhelming, but keep in mind that grief is a natural process. Got an article here that talks about coping with grief and loss and how to deal with the grieving process and learn to heal. It's written by three psychologists, Melinda Smith, Lawrence Robinson, and Jeannie Siegel. It says coping with the loss of someone or something you love is one of life's biggest challenges. Often the pain of loss can feel overwhelming. You may experience all kinds of difficult and unexpected emotions, from shock, anger, disbelief, profound sadness. The pain of grief can also disrupt your physical health, making it difficult to sleep, eat, or even think straight. These are normal reactions to significant loss. But while there is no right or wrong way to grieve, there are healthy ways to cope with the pain. In time, you can ease your sadness and come to terms with your loss, find new meaning, and move on with your life. Well, the focus is on those who lost loved ones in conflict. But if you think about it, these strategies, these tactics that we are going to discuss apply to any sort of loss. And while losing a loved one is a big change in life, there are lots of little changes in life that can also paralyze us. So first and foremost, what is grief? Well, grief is a natural response to loss. It's the emotional suffering you feel when something or someone you love has been taken away. The more significant the loss, the more intense the grief will be. There's lots of things in life that we can lose. Loss of a loved one, loss of health, losing a job, financial stability, retirement, even death of a pet, loss of a cherished dream, loss of friendships, selling a family home. There's many things that we lose that impact us. And even a subtle loss in life can trigger a sense of grief. For example, you might grieve after moving away from home, graduating from college, or changing jobs. Whatever your loss, it's personal to you, so you don't feel ashamed about how you feel or believe that it's somehow only appropriate to grieve for certain things. And I'm taking this from an article titled Coping with Grief and Loss. It says here, the grieving process is a highly individual experience, and I think that from a personal development perspective, that is true. All of us are on our own paths, on our own journeys. There's no right or wrong way to grieve, just like there's no right or wrong way for us to develop our own personal strategies. And how you grieve depends on many factors: your personality, your coping style, your life experience, your faith, and how significant the loss was to you. I think that's important to think about. There's an individual component to your strategy, your personal development, as well as an individual strategy for your grief. There are some myths this article refers to. The myth is that the pain will go away faster if you ignore it. Makes sense. Have you ever ignored a problem and it went away without you taking action? Most likely not. Next myth. It's important to be strong in the face of a loss. Feeling sad, frightened, or lonely is a small reaction to the loss. And crying doesn't make you weak. Crying, you don't need to protect your family or friends by putting on a brave front. Show your true feelings. I think that is included with any loss. It's important to be honest and open with yourself. Next myth is if you don't cry, it means you aren't sorry about the loss. Crying is a normal response to sadness, but it's not the only one. Those who don't cry may feel the pain just as deeply as others. Next myth, grieving should last about a year. There's no specific time frame for grieving. How long it takes differs from person to person. This is interesting, especially when it comes to your personal development strategy. How long do you give yourself? Sometimes we set goals. Sometimes we time box things. This should take this amount of time. And in reality, it may not just last for a year. It could take you a lifetime. It could take you a decade. It could take you, 2 decades. Important thing is that the sooner you come up with a plan and a strategy, the better chances you have of accomplishing that goal or getting closer to that objective that you have set for yourself. Next myth is moving on with your life means forgetting about your loss. This is a tough one here. Moving on means you've accepted your loss, but that's not the same as forgetting. You can move on with your life and keep the memory of someone or something you lost as an important part of you. In fact, as we move through life, these memories can become more and more integral to defining the people we are. And how true is that? Many times we do things in our lives that we're not proud of. Many times we didn't say the right thing or we treated somebody badly. In the case of a military person going off to serve our country, then getting killed in the theater of war, it's possible that we didn't say all the right things, that we have regrets. But it's also important to realize that those memories, those actions, those things that you did are all part of who you are. They define you. They make up your core, your inner self. They are what you are. And to ignore them and to not accept them can be a difficult thing to do and can actually impede your progress with respect to accomplishing goals, moving on, and having some sort of normalcy past the loss that you had. I think that's what this is all about. It's all about making sure that we have the ability to accept who we are, even though it's not always that easy to have that new reality. You're listening to My Strategy. I am your host, John M. Hawkins. We're coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. When we come back, we're going to go through some of the stages of grief, the symptoms, and understand emotionally where we are. We'll be right back. Hello and welcome back, everyone. This is My Strategy. I am your host, John M. Hawkins. We're coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. Well, I'm very happy to be here with you today on this Memorial Day weekend. I'm glad you could join us. Today we're talking about Memorial Day, and in fact, this is a tribute to those soldiers who paid the ultimate price for our freedom. Right before the break, we were talking about coping with grief. In this segment, I want to talk about how to deal with the grieving process. I've got an article here by Melinda Smith, Lawrence Robinson, and Jeannie Siegel. It's called Coping with Grief and Dealing with Loss. How to deal with the grieving process. Grieving, a loss is an inevitable part of life. There are ways to cope with the pain, coming to terms with your grief, and eventually finding a way to pick up the pieces and move on with your life. I suggest you acknowledge the pain, accept that grief can trigger many different and unexpected emotions. Understand that your grieving process will be unique to you. Seek out face-to-face support from people who care about you. Support yourself emotionally by taking care of yourself. Physically, recognize the difference between grief and depression. I think it's important that when you are going through a process like this, there are certain steps within the process. In fact, it says here there's different stages of grief. In 1969, psychiatrist Elizabeth Kubler-Ross introduced what became known as the 5 stages of grief. These stages of grief were based on her studies of the feeling of patients facing terminal illness, but many people have generalized them to other types of negative life changes and losses, such as the death of a loved one or a breakup. The 5 stages of grief are denial. This can't be happening to me. Anger. Why is this happening? Who can I blame? Bargaining. Make this not happen, and in return, I will do something. Depression. I'm too sad to do anything. Finally, acceptance. I am at peace with what happened. Think about it. The last time you were in a situation where something didn't quite go your way and you were unable to accomplish a goal, you had a loss of a loved one, whatever it was, what stage were you in? Did you deny it? Were you angry? Did you try and bargain to make it go away? Were you depressed and didn't do anything? Or did you accept that it happened, alter your strategy, and move on? I think it's important to understand these various stages of grief, because if you understand where you are and you have the ability to assess and analyze your current situation, which is something we talk about, then you stand a better chance of altering the actions that you could take or are taking, and that will ultimately help you. It goes on to say that if you are experiencing any of these emotions following a loss, it may help you to know that your reaction is natural and that you will heal in time. However, not everybody who grieves goes through all these stages, and that's okay. Contrary to popular belief, you do not have to go through each stage in order to heal. And I think, too, the better you are at dealing with grief, the little setbacks in life, the better you are at dealing with the bigger setbacks. Getting to a point where you can accept what's happened and move on. It's not easy to accept what's happened, but if you don't accept what has happened and the new reality, it will keep you from moving on, and that is certainly not something that the loved one in your life would want to happen. They would want you to go on. They would want you to live a full life. These setbacks happen in many different ways to all different people of all walks of life. It doesn't discriminate. It says here, grief can also be a roller coaster. Instead of a series of stages, we might think of the grievance process as a roller coaster, full of ups, downs, highs, and lows. Like many roller coasters, the ride tends to be rougher in the beginning. The lows may be deeper and longer. The difficult period should become less intensive and shorter as the time goes by, but it takes time to work through a loss. Even years after a loss, especially at special events such as a family wedding or the birth of a child, we may still experience a strong sense of grief. The source is Hospice Foundation of America. And that is true. Highs and lows may be deeper and longer. And I think it's important, too, to track the time you spend grieving. While you might try and time box it to a set period of time, it could take years. What about the emotional symptoms of grief? Again, taking this from an article called Coping with Grief and Loss. Shock and disbelief. Right after a loss, it can be hard to accept what happened. You may feel numb. Sadness. Profound sadness is probably the most universally experienced symptom of grief. You may have feelings of emptiness, despair, yearning, or deep loneliness. What about guilt? You may regret or feel guilty about things you did or didn't say. Anger. If the loss was nobody's fault, you may feel angry and resentful. If you lost a loved one, you may be angry with yourself, God, the doctors, or even the person who died. Even the person who died for abandoning you. Fear. A significant loss can trigger a host of worries and fears. You may feel anxious, helpless, insecure. You can have panic attacks. The death of a loved one can trigger fears about your own mortality. There's also a number of physical symptoms that come along with this. Fatigue, nausea, lowered immunity, weight loss or weight gain, aches, pains, and insomnia. It doesn't have to be a big grief that causes you to feel this way. Sometimes the little things add up and can keep us from moving forward, can keep us from accomplishing what we need to accomplish, keep us from accepting the new reality and moving on. Lots of ways we can find support, though. Turn to friends and family members. Accept that people feel awkward when trying to comfort someone who's grieving. Draw comfort from your faith. Join a support group. Talk to a therapist or counselor. There's lots of ways that you can find support. And I think it's important to assess and analyze. And the sooner you realize that you are in one of these stages and grieving and find your support system, hopefully the better and quicker you can recover. But again, it's not bound to time. Could take weeks, months, years, decades. It all just depends on the person, because that process, like our own personal development, is an individual one. You're listening to My Strategy. I am your host, John M. Hawkins, coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. When we come back, we're going to talk about those soldiers who survived. We'll be right back. Hello and welcome back, everyone. This is My Strategy. I am your host, John M. Hawkins. We're coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. Well, I'm happy to be here with you today. Glad you can join us. Our episodes are live and on Saturdays at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. Today we have a special Memorial Day tribute. Been talking about those soldiers who paid the ultimate price for our freedom. Talking about the challenges of the veterans who do survive these conflicts. And we're giving tips and tricks to help those returning develop a strategy to stay on track. Love to get your thoughts. You can send us an email to talk@johnmhawkins.com. That's talk@johnmhawkins.com. We do have a weekly giveaway if you do send us your thoughts. Right before the break, we were talking about the various stages of grief. In this segment, I want to transition a little. I want to talk about those soldiers who have survived conflict, those who lost friends in the battlefield. In fact, there's many implications not only for the families of those who lost loved ones, but also for those soldiers who serve side by side. Got an article here by Kelly Dickerson. Post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, affects an estimated 1 in 10 Afghanistan veterans and as many as 1 in 5 Iraqi war veterans. It says here the physical pain faced by these soldiers returning home goes beyond the consequences of experiencing the trauma of war. Journalist and filmmaker Sebastian Junger, who spent a year in 2007 embedded with the American soldiers at an Army outpost, saw some of the heaviest fighting in the Afghanistan war. He argues that the unusually high rates of PTSD and emotional stress among American veterans is not simply due to what happens in the war zone. He has an interesting theory here. He says that it's due to the isolated and disconnected society our soldiers are coming home to. You think about it. When our soldiers join a branch, they go through a socialization process. The process whereby you turn in your street clothes, your street shoes, your street glasses, everything that you came in with, including your hairstyle. Socialization process then has them issue you standard issue shoes, standard issue uniform, standard issue haircut. And part of that socialization means that you are part of a team and you have team members and people you can depend on. But he's saying that when you come back, our society is isolated and disconnected. I think this is an interesting point. He argues that returning to the individualism and loneliness of Western society makes soldiers desperately miss the sense of connection and closeness they felt with their comrades, and makes it difficult for them to recover from the traumas of war. During a TED Talk in New York, on November 4th, Junger told the story of what happened after he returned home to the U.S. from Afghanistan. It's a picture of Sebastian Junger here, looking distressed. He says here, for months, he found himself experiencing panic attacks, moments of paralyzing fear, bad dreams, a case of what he calls short-term PTSD. Symptoms of PTSD, a poorly understood psychiatric condition that can develop after someone has a traumatizing experience. Can include flashbacks, anxiety, depression, loss of interest in activities that a person once enjoyed, according to the National Institute of Mental Health. But it's not just combat veterans who have mental health problems when they return home. Even those who don't see any combat report symptoms of PTSD, and non-combat stressors play a part in PTSD. This was found out by a study done by the U.S. Navy. Junger's theory is that what happens while at war is only part of the issue, and that veterans' problems are compounded by what happens when they return home. American soldiers are ripped from a tribe-like community where they eat, sleep, fight together, and then suddenly drop back into a disconnected one. Younger points out, aside from small family units, we're all very isolated from one another. In a 2014 TED Talk, he honed in on alienation as one of the main reasons veterans sometimes miss being at war, a phenomenon that is difficult for civilians to grasp. He says that alienation is not the same as PTSD, but it evokes some of the same feeling of anxiety and depression. This is an interesting concept because if you think about it, in our society, we might be isolated. We might be focusing on individualism. And I would look at this from a corporate culture perspective. What is the culture that you are in? If you are in a job and part of a team and doing good things, and something happens where you are forced out of that culture, that tight community, you now may feel alone. You may feel disconnected. So that's why I say, some of these feelings, some of these scenarios are similar regardless of whether you lose someone or you are suffering a job loss or some other type of loss. It says here there's anthropological evidence that soldiers who return home to a tight-knit community similar to one they experienced during a war recover faster than those who return to a more isolated society. That being said, on this Memorial Day weekend, think about the impact of those soldiers who feel isolated, left out. Maybe they need a call. Maybe they need somebody to lean in and help them. Even the smallest gesture can make them feel more connected. Especially that since they're experiencing this isolation in society. And for you and I, it might not seem like much of isolation because we have our standard process and practices that we go through. But for them, the contrast from where they came from to now could be too great. You're listening to My Strategy. I'm your host, John M. Hawkins, coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. When we come back, we're going to talk about creating a strategy to help honor those veterans. We'll be right back. Hello and welcome back, everyone. I'm your host, John M. Hawkins. You're listening to My Strategy. We're coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. I Well, happy to be here with you today. Glad you could join us. Our episodes are live and on Saturdays at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. Today we've been doing a Memorial Day tribute, been honoring those soldiers who paid the ultimate price for our freedom. We've been talking about the challenges of the veterans who do survive conflicts. We're giving tips and tricks to those returning to help them develop a strategy to stay on track. Right before the break, we were talking about those soldiers who survived. PTSD affects 1 in 10 returning from Afghanistan and 1 in 5 from Iraq. Talked about the isolation and how that disconnected feeling when they come back to our Western society has an impact on their recovery. In this segment, I want to talk about developing your own strategy. Weekly, we go through ways that we can develop a strategy using a systematic approach. Many ways to do this. I go by a 5-step process where it's awareness, assess and analyze, strategize and plan, implement and support and evaluate. Today, I don't want to go through that systematic approach. Today, I want to talk about some tactical things. Tactical versus strategic. Strategic is the course of actions, which could include those 5 different process steps. Today, I want to be tactical. Tactical are the things that we can do to help. Today, it's all about action and helping honor those we loved and lost in U.S. conflicts. So what are some of the things we can do, the tactical things? Well, we could pick up the tab for their coffee or meal. Help a soldier out. If you see someone in a restaurant, pick up a tab, say hi, thank them for their service. Remember, they're coming from this tribe that they served with in a foreign land. They come here and they feel isolated. That single act of kindness could make their day. What about helping a vet to a doctor's appointment? Many vets come back disabled, infirmed. They have trouble making it to the doctor's appointment. And if you have a driver's license, you could help them. Service dogs. Service dogs are a great way to help veterans with mobile disabilities and post-traumatic stress. Dogs also can help them feel connected. I'm getting these tips from an article by Stacy Conrad called 11 Honorable Ways You Can Help a Veteran. Yeah, animals definitely have a way to brighten our day. Another tip she provides is replace one light bulb with a green one. The Green Light Vet Project is a simple way to remind yourself and others about the sacrifices veterans have made for our country and to show your appreciation for them. Keeping in mind that these veterans, many of them know servicemen and women who did pay the ultimate price for our freedom. Maybe getting a green light could help you remember. Help sponsor and honor Flight Home. Many who fought for our freedoms have never seen the national memorials honoring their efforts and their fallen friends. Honor flights help send veterans of the world wars to Washington, D.C. to see their monuments. You can help sponsor a flight for as little as $4. What about write a letter? Write a letter of gratitude. Write a letter of gratitude. Send a care package gift. A letter of thanks to our veterans, to those who are currently serving overseas. Imagine being overseas and getting a care package, getting your favorite coffee, your favorite anything could be a welcome reminder that you are connected back home. Volunteer at the VA hospital. Whatever your talents are, they'll certainly be utilized at the Veterans Hospital, from working directly with patients to helping recreational programs, or even just providing companionship. Veterans are of all ages, many ages, not all ages, but some are late in their years post-service. Others are recently discharged. You can help them by volunteering. There's lots of different things, assistance programs, a lot of times they need volunteers and people who can help. To help them with job training. Adjusting to the civilian life isn't always smooth sailing. Hire Heroes helps vets with interviews, or Hire Heroes, it's the name of a group, helps vets with interview skills, resumes, and training so they can find post-military career work. They can even partner with various employers to host a job board. Through Hire Heroes, you can help veterans with mock interviews, career counseling, job searches, workshops, and more. Who knew you could help that way? But if you think about it, if you've been working for any time period in your field, it could be a year, 2 years, 10 years, 20 years, you have more experience, more relevant experience than somebody who's recently coming back from service to the country. And even that little experience that you may think you have could be of great benefit to somebody coming back from military service. Remember, they're starting over. They're moving from where they were to a new life. There's also programs to help build a house where you can help some of our heroes with places to live. So there's lots of ways that we can help and honor those who served, including volunteer for a stand down. The VA continually hosts stand downs. It's a 1 to 3 day event that gives much needed supplies and services to homeless veterans. Vets can receive anything from food, clothing, health screening, housing, substance abuse, mental health counseling. And keeping in mind that, talking about grief and what these servicemen and women are dealing with, they're trying to transition from where they were, from the environment of war and battle, back to civilization, Western civilization. And if you think about it, doing that transition is not always easy. And regardless of who you are and the stage of life you're in, there's things that you can do to show your appreciation for the service of these servicemen and women. You're listening to My Strategy, coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. I'm your host, John M. Hawkins. When we come back, we're going to conclude and find a way to put this plan into place. We'll be right back. Hello and welcome back, everyone. I'm your host, John M. Hawkins. We're coming to you live from the BBM Network and TuneIn Radio. You're listening to My Strategy. Well, in case you missed this broadcast, you can listen on iHeart Radio, Apple, iTunes. We even have video available on YouTube. If you'd like to have something covered in the show, you can send an email to talk@johnmhawkins.com. That's talk@johnmhawkins.com, or you can give us a call at 1-844-MY-STRATEGY. Number again is 1-844-MY-STRATEGY. Today, we have been honoring those soldiers who paid the ultimate price for our freedom. We've been talking about the challenges of veterans who survive conflicts. I've been giving tips and tricks to help those returning develop a strategy to stay on track. Yes, this is our Memorial Day tribute. In the show, we've been talking about Memorial Day and how many of us see it as a day to get away from work, from the day-to-day stresses that we face. But the reason we have the opportunity to do this is because of those men and women who died while serving in our U.S. military. The loss of their lives has a great impact on many of their loved ones, all their loved ones, in fact. Their loved ones, while the military gives them a process and resources to deal with the loss, it's not always that easy dealing with loss. In some cases, the loss of someone in your life that you love can be one of your biggest challenges, especially if you depended on them or they were somebody you were so close to. And this pain then of losing them can be overwhelming. It can be hard for you to move on. You can be angry. But keep in mind that grieving is a natural process. It's something that we all must go through when we lose a loved one, when we lose anything in life. Anything in life that we lose can have an impact. I think it's important for us to think about ways we can cope with that grief. In fact, there's 5 stages of grief that we all go through. But being able to identify those symptoms and figuring out where are we in that grieving process, identifying and assessing what it is that we are feeling can help us overcome it quicker rather than ignoring it or not accepting it or being angry. And I think that's what we all need to come to, is a way to accept what has happened. Look at the physical signs, the emotional signs, those things that all are indicators that we are grieving. Now, for those soldiers who did survive, many of them come back with post-traumatic stress disorder. And from a PTSD perspective, 1 in 10 vets returning from Afghanistan had PTSD. 1 in 5 who came back from the Iraqi war conflict had PTSD. One of the theories was that the change from their culture, their connected tribal-like culture in the battlefield, to a Western disconnected individualistic society is one of the main reasons for the PTSD. And there might be some truth to that. If you think about it, if you're in the battlefield, you have friends that you are working with towards a common goal. There's a common objective. You know what you're going to do on a day-to-day basis. They have your back. It's all about the team. When you come back to a Western civilization, we have different values. It's about individualism. It's about your freedom. It's about being able to do what you want when you want it. But that shift from being part of that group to being part of the Western society can have an impact. So it comes down to finding ways that we can help our veterans, honor them, pick up their coffee, get engaged in their lives, spend time with them, and help them. Because when you engage, you can help them become and feel a better part of this society. You've been listening to My Strategy. I'm your host, John M. Hawkins. Coming to you live from the BBM Network and TuneIn Radio. We will see you next time.